Are you ready to grow your financial practice to heights you've never imagined? You're listening to the Elevated Advisor Podcast with your online business mentor and host, David Scranton. Each week, you'll learn Dave's secrets that have helped him become one of the most successful financial advisors in the country. So are you ready to become an elevated advisor? The Elevated Advisor Podcast starts now.
And welcome to this week's episode of the Elevated Advisor Podcast. I'm David Scranton, your host. And if you're watching, not listening, you'll notice that this handsome feller next to me is Jeff Small. Jeff Small, president of Arbor Financial Services right down here in Florida. And the reason I asked Jeff to be on today is because Jeff is a published author. He has his own book here, Turning Financial Planning Right Side Up. And he attributes a lot of growth that he had in more recent years to this book. So today we're going to be sharing with you the benefits of being a published author as a financial advisor. So Jeff, all right, great having you here, man.
Hey, Dave, great to be here. Great to talk about the book and how it can help other advisors write their own, tell their own story.
That's right. That's right. And this is your story. I know because I read it. When it first came out, before it first came out, I actually read it. That's right. So how long has the book been out now?
The book's been out for 5 years.
5 years. Okay. So again, if you're watching us, if you're not listening, if you're watching actually the video, I guess the question I have is, if you notice that Jeff's goatee in this picture from 5 years ago was actually solid brown. So Jeff, tell us the truth. Have you gotten grayer since then, or did you Grecian formula this for the photo?
Actually, that photo's from 10 years ago, so it's just age, Dave.
It's age.
That's all it is age. Nothing else.
You don't have to tell me about age. Trust me, I know that. We're only about a year apart, the two of us. So let's start by telling everybody, first of all, how long have you been in the business, and what made you get in?
Well, finance was something that I always loved, and I tell the story about how I got in the business in the book. But at an early age, I wanted to get into the world of the stock market and investing. And so 35 years later, here I am, a best-selling author. My book went to #1 on Amazon.
It did.
And I am so happy that I never did anything else but the career I chose in financial services. And
who on this podcast never had a book that hit #1 like yours did?
My book did better than both of your books.
We have a little inside joke because mine got as high as #2 on the best-selling list. His got up to #1. So how many years ago was that you actually got into financial services?
It was 1986 to be exact, and I went to work with a financial advisor back in the day who kind of took me in when I was still in college and got me licensed and showed me the ropes. And then after that, I graduated to a much larger firm.
And then you were doing Leap Systems for a little while, right? On life insurance.
I did Leap Systems in the late 80s, early 90s, learned about macroeconomic modeling of money and how to use a dollar more than once and all that fancy talk that we like to use to help our clients.
Mm-hmm. So then there was a point where I believe you shed your securities licenses and you were doing primarily annuity business, right? And that happened roughly when?
That is correct. That was about 1999. I shed my securities licenses because I was doing some venture capital funding, but I was still in the business working with annuities, and fixed indexed annuities as well.
Okay. And then I met you about 10 years ago, and you had picked up your securities license again, your Series 65, correct?
That's correct.
And you were doing, I know back then you were doing about 7 or 8 million of business, total new business each year, annuity business. And last year, you brought in how much new business total?
A total of 76 million of assets gathered.
Total of 76 million last year. So you went up tenfold in 10 years, which is awesome. It's incredible. And I know as I've tracked you and paid attention to you over the last decade, it hasn't been linear. In fact, the biggest jump that you've had in your business was right after this book. I would say that you were probably bringing in 20 million or so of assets a year, and correct me if I'm wrong, right before the book, and then you jumped to 45 or 50 within a year or two after the book. Is that correct?
It was actually, I was doing around 12 to 15 million a year before the book, and with the help of the book and some of the methodologies that I developed in the book to translate for people that they could interpret and read, my production just exploded. It went up threefold. During the book, and hasn't ever been less than that since.
So you went from 15 million to 45 million of new assets gathered in a year.
That's correct.
So what do you attribute that to? I mean, what is, part of it I know is just personal confidence, personal swagger that, hey, it makes you feel stronger and better postured as a public author. That's part of it. And we can't undermine that or minimize that, because the reality of it is the better we feel about what we're doing, the better our message comes across. But it's a lot more than that. So what, in terms of concrete terms, would you say you can attribute the success of the book to this quantum leap you had?
Well, it elevated your credibility as an advisor substantially by being a highly rated author and having a book that was very fundamentally sound for consumers. And so it's a consumer-centric book where I developed all kinds of philosophies and verifications and numbers and things that would help clients to improve their situations. And so I taught them the angles of the game of investing, but from their perspective. And every advisor, Dave, has angles they learn about this business, and they have a story that they could put in a book and give to clients to develop that same credibility. Sure. It's not unique to me. It's unique to every advisor in our marketplace today.
That's right. That's right. So, okay, if we break it down, I think, part of it is the fact that you actually marketed the book. So not only did you get the book done, but then you marketed it for a while. I remember you had a full-page ad in a magazine that was in your local area. So you got it out there so people would know who you are. So you did some branding with it. And branding is great because it helps your lead generation, right? So now if you're better branded, they know who you are because of that. Now all of a sudden, whenever you do a workshop, your attendance goes up. More people want to come and see you because you're a bit of a local celebrity, right?
That's true.
All because you branded this in part.
That's right. My book's in the public libraries in my geography where my practice is, and people go in there and ask for it all the time. They didn't have it, so they ordered them. But it's in every library because people want to see the book. And so if you use a book that's consumer-orientated and it's an advocate sense of financial education, that's where you want to advocate for your customers, and that's where you want to develop your own baseline or fundamental baselines to communicate to the public. That's the key. But what I did to promote it, Dave, is a little bit different than everybody else. Besides just locally branding, I did a pre-90-day blitzkrieg of pre-launch media campaigns, mostly through radio across the country.
I remember that.
And I watched the ratings go up on Amazon every week. And when I got the whole number one, I exclaimed something I can't say in this podcast. Okay. I said, holy cow.
Yeah.
Okay. I can't believe it.
And then you called me to give me the business because I had gotten to number 2, not number 1. So
that's right.
So you did a lot of things, and you're right. I'm glad you said that because radio is great for books. And I know you hate radio. You're a TV guy. You've been on TV a bunch of times, and you do a really nice job. But radio you don't like, but you sucked it up and did a lot of radio interviews because you wanted to get this out there. Perfect. But let's pivot a bit, okay? When somebody becomes a client, are they buying your products or are they really buying you?
Well, they're buying their belief in you.
Right.
Okay, is what they're buying. They're not interested in products. They're not interested in platitudes or philosophies or doing something on faith from a gut instinct. They want to see the visual component of the value you're providing. And by having your own book, you can communicate that.
They want to get to know you. And the nice thing about the book, I find, is it's a chance for you to put some of your personality in there, not just your financial concepts, but your personality. They learn a little bit about you as an individual, learn a little bit about your family, and they feel that you're a real human. So first of all, they get to figure out who you are, and they walk away from reading the book feeling like they've known you for a long time. And I think that's a big part of it too.
That's a huge part of it because I describe how I got into the business. I have all of my kids are in the book, so if somebody tells me they've read the book, I always ask them, okay, what did I say about my children? So that's a test.
Yeah, no, it's that's one of the benefits for sure. And then also using it as a sales tool, right? If you have a void, then anything gets sucked into that vacuum, that void, right? So when people want to go home and think about something, or between meetings, I know you're a person who likes to get the written commitment from somebody in the second meeting, not the first, correct?
That is correct. The first meeting is just really more of an educational standpoint and what can you actually do for them. But in my book, because it's so valuable, there are advisors across the country that are still utilizing it to educate their customers. But I won't take a client on unless they read a specific chapter or two in my book So, because it's all about education. We are educators and advocates. We are not salespeople. And having the book allows you to take that type of position, Dave.
You give them the homework. I like it. But that's where I was going with this, because if they're between number 1 and number 2 meeting, and you said some things to them in the first meeting, and there's a vacuum, anything's going to fill the vacuum. So they're going to go home, and all of a sudden, their reticular activating system, that part of their subconscious mind, is now programmed to hear conversations. So they're going to hear things on TV, conversations about different financial concepts. They're going to develop some opinions, many of which could be wrong, right? Or they're going to Google stuff, which is even worse, right? They go home and Google. I mean, who the heck knows what's going to come up? But if you give them the homework to fill that void, so now they're learning. It's like good nutrition. It's like you're feeding them good food, and now between meetings, they're reading those chapters. And it's good food. It fills the vacuum, but also it fills it with stuff that you want to fill it with. Now you've controlled that a little bit, which is why not only you use your book, but there's other advisors that we know that use your book too, because again, it fills the void with a positive message.
That's right. And that's what our customers or our prospects, our clients, they're craving that type of information. They're in pursuit of the truth, and it's your job to deliver that truth. But the way you do that is with visual confirmation and visual learning. You can't do that with words or just things that they're going to hear auditorily, because then they're not making a decision from the cerebral cortex. They're making a decision from their gut, and then they're going to question that decision later if they did the right thing. And you don't want that kind of experience with your customers, especially your new ones, especially when you're moving larger accounts.
And by the way, this is really hard to do if you're on the FINRA side and you have a Series 6 or Series 7. I know I wrote my first book and I was FINRA licensed, knowing that we're going to try to get a FINRA letter on the book, and I wasn't going to be able to do it. So I knew I was going to give up my Series 7 at that point in my first book, which I think was 2011. But that's okay. When you wrote this, you had your Series 65, so you weren't under the FINRA guideline per se. It was a more liberal SEC guideline. So as long as you didn't exaggerate everything, as long as everything could be substantiated, you were good. You were good.
Oh, of course. And we obviously it's got to be above the line, not below the line in terms of what we're allowed to promote to the public.
Yeah.
But it's more of an educational tool than anything.
Yeah. So, okay, it works because, number one, it's a branding thing, which allows you to get out there and promote it. So it helps your lead generation efforts. It works because people get to know you personally. It works because you're postured, right? And it works because you're educating them between number 1 and number 2 meeting. So now you're filling that vacuum that exists in their minds with some good healthy diet.
You forgot about the most important thing, Dave.
Yeah.
It works because it gives you credibility. It makes you
Posturing.
an authority. That's posturing, but that authority lifts and elevates you up above everybody else they've ever worked with, whether they have an advisor or not, even if they're self-directed and they don't have a relationship with a financial professional.
Jeff, you remember these days. In the late 90s, I started doing dinner seminars, and I was immediately credible because there weren't a lot of people doing dinner seminars. And people thought, well, gosh, if you can afford to feed all of us, you must be the real deal. Unfortunately, that doesn't work with dinner seminars anymore, especially if you're here in Southern Florida where I am. I can go to Ruth Chris Steakhouse on a financial advisor virtually every night of the week. That doesn't posture you as it did before. But if you have your own radio show, guess what? You're still looked at as the expert. If you have your own book, you're still looked at as the expert. So good point. Now, let's talk about the process. Okay. How much time of yours did it take? Talk about from the first interview and then edits and what you had to go through to make this yours, to make it a strong book. You had a ghostwriter, but still, it's not effort-free, right?
It's not anywhere even close to effort-free. Yeah. We did an 8 to 12 hour brain dump of all of my ideas, recorded that by video and audio, and then I wrote the paragraphs out for each chapter that I wanted in the book, and then I elaborated that on further. And then the ghostwriter and I would trade off, okay, what do you want to say about here? And then I would subscribe out, and then they would scribe out. And then it had to go through, of course, compliance, which was no fun at all. Remember, Dave? Anyway, that's no fun.
I actually do remember that, yes.
So it took about a year, though, to prepackage it up and get it done correctly, because then once the manuscript is done, then you've got to get it indexed and scrubbed out for grammar and then printed and produced.
So it took you some time up front that day when you did the brain dump, a day or two on the brain dump. I get it. And then after that, how much time would you say it took you every week as you went chapter by chapter with the ghostwriter back and forth?
Well, the last couple of months were the most fast and furious parts of the effort line, but I would say I was probably putting in anywhere from 2 to 4 hours a week on the book over that time frame.
Good. So, the good thing about having a ghostwriter is you're going to get a better quality book that's actually going to be readable, right? A lot of financial advisors, if they just write the book themselves, it's too technical. And yes, some engineers might read it, but most, quote, normal people aren't going to read it, right? So that's where the personal stories come in, and a good professional writer can help. But again, you can't just put your hands up and let that person do it. You've got to keep your fingerprint on it so that people know, hey, this is you, and it's got your seal of approval.
That's a really good point, Dave. I went through 3 ghostwriters before I found the one that I liked, and
the third was yours, right?
The third.
Yeah, the
That's
third was
correct.
the one you. Yep.
The third was the one I picked, but you've got to find somebody that's going to match your tempo, your style, your information, your brand. This book has got to be about you. You cannot rely on the ghostwriter. The ghostwriter is just there to add the icing, but your content is the cake, and that content's got to come from you.
So I always tell people, if you're thinking this is good, I want to do this. There are plenty of turnkey programs around there where they'll team you up with a ghostwriter. I know we have one at our company that we use, and so on. But the first step is you've got to get your isms down. What do I mean by isms? Well, I've got Scrantonisms. I got the little things that I say that are a little different. Jeff has his Jeffisms, right? So what you have to start doing is keeping track of those things, whether it's things you say on the phone to clients, things you say in meetings, things that you do a little different. It could be as simple as taking your smartphone, go in the notes section, and start to put these things together. Because if you can put these together, now you have a long list of these isms that you want to get in the book. Okay. Now you're ready to get started. And you need to really, I would suggest doing that for, I don't know about you, Jeff, I'd suggest doing that for at least 2-3 months, maybe 6 months, so you can get a feel for all the things that have to go in. Don't worry about the order, but get ideas of content, or maybe even some personal stories.
Sure.
Client stories or things that you want in there. So you've got all these components, and then when you sit with a ghostwriter, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, right? You dump the box on the table, all the pieces are here, and then the ghostwriter and you could figure out how to put it together.
Dave, you can also think about the things you would want your existing clients or your new clients to know that they don't know. What's the most important thing you can teach them from an advocacy standpoint if they're just your best friend and you're not trying to convert them into a client? And those are the types of things that people are thirsting for from a knowledge base. They want that information, they need that information, and you've got it. You just got to figure out a way to get it out of you and into book form.
Yeah. And it's got to be something special. I always teach advisors is, that, to attract instead of chasing prospects to attract, you've got to get 4 things right. Okay. You have to have a business model that hopefully differentiates you somewhat from your competitors. And that's what has to go in here is those differentiating factors. Then you have to be branded with that model, which is done by book and as well as other things. And then you get into the things we normally think of, like, okay, how do I have a lead generation system that's attraction-based? And then how do I sell in an attraction-based way? But it starts with finding out all the points that make you different and then having the book for branding. Because, again, dinner seminars used to posture us as, well, they must be the real deal because they're feeding the whole town. That was a quarter century ago. But now, all of a sudden, it's not that way anymore. Adult education class, if you teach adult ed where you're in the course curriculum, that could work. That could posture you to a certain degree. But again, those things are getting shut down in a lot of places after COVID and so on. So the ways to really posture yourself as an expert are getting fewer and fewer between. If you're great on the radio and you don't mind it, a radio show is a great way to posture yourself, because if you have a radio show, they don't care if you bought your airtime or not. Nobody knows the difference, right? Bottom line is you're postured as the expert. But for a lot of people, you're not natural on radio or TV, like in Jeff's case, right? So the book becomes the simplest thing you can do, because all you have to do is team up with a ghostwriter, and then even if you're not a good writer, that person will make you look like a good writer. The ghostwriter's name, if you notice, shows up nowhere on this. If you're watching the video, nowhere on here is the ghostwriter. The ghostwriter doesn't exist, and that's totally legal, totally legitimate. So this is the simplest way, unless you've got a lot of natural raw talent in front of a camera or in front of a microphone. It's the single best way to posture yourself as that expert.
No, you're right. And even if you just had the chapter titles and you couldn't think of anything else after a title that you wanted to help people learn about, the ghostwriter can create a basis for that, and then you can maybe add to it later if you can't think of anything. But at least come up with several chapter titles for your book that you'd want people to learn and know about.
Yeah. Or if you're not creative enough to think of the title, but you have the content, then vice versa. They'll help you figure out the title. So it works all ways. But again, I can't stress enough. Yeah, yes, you went up tenfold in 10 years, which is remarkable. But the fact that the biggest quantum leap by far happened because of this one thing. So if in closing, just give us your final thoughts, if you don't mind, about becoming a published author, and do you whom you think it's for, or do you think maybe there's some types of financial advisors for whom it wouldn't be a good idea? Let's hear your final thoughts, if you could.
Well, I think that, if your nature as a financial advisor is to help people and you have an honest methodology and approach with your clients, then to get your message out there, you should have a book. You need a book. You need a book to get to that next level of success and production. You need a book to help educate as many consumers and change the culture based on your belief system. And nothing better than a book will do that, because people do believe what they read. Don't they, Dave?
They absolutely do. They believe what they read. They believe what they hear on the radio. But they don't necessarily believe that everything that comes out of the mouth of somebody doing a seminar presentation. So that's the credibility factor.
That's right.
I love it. All right, Jeff, thank you so much for being here with us to talk about the benefits of the book, Turning Financial Planning Right Side Up as a financial advisor. And I know you're about to start working on an update. So in the next few months, we should have an update to this book, which will be pretty exciting.
It's time for an update. We're going to do a relaunch by the end of the year.
All right. So, Jeff, thank you very much for being here on this week's episode of the Elevated Advisor Podcast. So, can we go fishing now, Jeff?
Sure. Let's go fishing. Let's go
Good.
fishing.
Oh, by the way, if you're a fisherman, okay, you want to look at some of the videos here. Where do you post a lot of your fishing videos? You have quite a following as a fisherman. So, if you like to do any offshore fishing,
he's embellishing. The following is just a little bit. We've got several videos on YouTube that we did. I've got a professional videographer that we utilize. But if you go to the channel Fish Gang, you'll see some of the really cool fish we've caught. And soon, coming in one of those videos in the future, is going to be Dave Scranton himself.
I think Uncle Dave was in one of the videos at one point. But
you were.
Maybe you deleted it by now. Who knows? So anyway, all right, Jeff, thanks again. And thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Elevated Advisor Podcast. And I hope you'll join us next week. Thank you.
You have been listening to the Elevated Advisor Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your colleagues. If you would like to talk about elevating your financial firm, reach out to us at theelevatedadvisorpodcast.com. Investment advisory services offered through Sound Income Strategies, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisory firm. Sound Income Strategies, LLC, and the Retirement Income Source, LLC, are associated entities.